Thanks for listening to Star Lores. If you like the show, please consider subscribing and giving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help us make more great content by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com. We would also love to hear from you on social media. You can follow Star Lores on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Enjoy the show, and may the Force be with you.
You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast. I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Mos Eisley Spaceport. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
In the Star Wars, scum denotes characters who live outside the law. From this perspective, all the freedom fighters in the Rebel Alliance during the Galactic Civil War were scum. Scum here is not meant to be an offensive epithet, but rather a categorization based on common galactic nomenclature. Villains are those individuals who violate, often through direct physical violence, the rights of others, and these violations are capricious. Their violence is random, done for its own sake, or purely to benefit the perpetrator. Sith Lords such as Naga Sadow or Darth Maul are prime examples of villains who committed unimaginable atrocities in the name of greed, personal vendettas, and lust for power. Less arch-villains include Jabba the Silligic Tour, also known as Jabba the Hutt, or Demagol, a Mandalorian mad scientist. It is in these individuals that we can examine the overlap and interplay between scum and villainy, for the two are almost always closely associated. Demagol and Jabba are both guilty of perpetrating much harm throughout their villainous careers. Jabba is villainous scum as his crimes violated the laws of the Galactic Empire and the Galactic Republic. Additionally, Jabba was fond of sadistic entertainment in its purest form, watching harm come to non-consenting sentience, earning him the villain label. Demagol justified his inhumane experiments on Jedi as acts of warfare. In the Mandalorian Code of Ethics, warfare is a perfectly moral act. Thus, Demagol was a villain, but not scum. The moral orientation of scum can be ambiguous, while villains are immoral to the majority of observers with little room for debate. Scum act outside the law because it is advantageous or because they are forced by unjust laws to do so. This means that scum's actions can be malignant, benevolent, or neutral. The transgressive behavior of scum is often commercial. They could sell fruit or spice, but spice demands a higher price due to its prohibition, and thus becomes their trade. The same is said of weapons dealing, slavery, or contract killing, depending on the legal context. Broadly speaking, most or all societies share a few core prohibitions. No murder, no random violence, don't take things that don't belong to you, and the like. Some villains believe that while violating these prohibitions may be harmful, they are preventing a greater amount of harm in the future. Darth Treya, for example, believed that the Jedi purge she orchestrated would bring peace to the galaxy. Rare is the intellectually honest villain, the one who behaves reprehensibly for its own sake. More common is the selfish villain, who wants power, riches, or fame, and doesn't care what results from their actions. The various criminal syndicates, such as Hutt Kaijadix, The Exchange, and Black Sun, are all examples of factions that behaved in villainous ways and employed many like-minded individuals. The primary interest of all these organizations was profit, and they placed no particular moral value on their actions. While a true sadist or disciple of evil might find their predilections accepted and encouraged in these organizations, harm and immorality was not necessarily their mandate. Other villains blindly pursue one objective. In their ceaseless hunger for that thing, they leave swaths of destruction and decay across the galaxy. Prince Caesar sought vengeance on Vader for the genocide of 200,000 Villainy by waging a small-scale, clandestine war against the Sith Lord. Many lives and property were lost in this conflict, and in the end, the dead Villainy remained dead. For Boba Fett, known by some as the most evil man in the galaxy, it was purely the acquisition of wealth that drove him to countless acts of violence.
The most common kind of villain behaves immorally due to the effects of group psychology. They could just as easily be planting one of 8,000 Alderaanian grass species as executing alleged insurgents without due process, depending on the prevailing norms of their group. Anonymous stormtroopers, ruthless Sith troopers, the pig-like Gamorrean guards, and foot soldiers of various villainous factions throughout history are examples of this garden variety villain. Powerful Force users can also corrupt the minds of people around them, subtly and passively influencing their companions towards giving in to their darkest impulses. This illuminates the question of free will. The empirical reality of this concept is best left to the clerics and philosophers, but the question of whether a person is responsible for their own behavior is worth considering in light of the little understood powers like the Force.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Any activity that occurs outside of the established laws of a government, such as Galactic Republic, happens in the underworld. As such, it is in the galaxy's underworld where much of the scum and villainy reside. For the most part, the underworld is populated by self-interested criminals. Individuals of nearly every sentient species live in the underworld. Even artificial life forms like Gorm, the Dissolver, or Forlom find a place here. It thrives in decentralized areas like the Outer Rim, but even core worlds have their own shadowed regions, where villains can wallow in scum. The underworld takes physical shape in smoke-filled cantinas, shadowy asteroid colonies, and generally anywhere away from judgmental, government-sponsored eyes. A certain cantina in Mos Eisley, or the Broken Tusk, are the kinds of dimly lit public houses where denizens of the underworld socialize. Far-flung worlds like Tatooine, Nar Shaddaa, and Ord Mantell have traditionally hosted the underworld throughout their histories, but even highly centralized capitals of law and order like Coruscant have their seething underbellies of criminals in the megapolis's lower levels.
Factions which thrive financially by illegal and exploitative means typically carve a niche for themselves somewhere in the galaxy's extensive underworld, far from the surveillance of states and their associated do-gooders. Such organizations include the eons-old Black Sun Syndicate, the Titanic Hut Kaijidix, the Shadowy Exchange, and the conniving Zan Consortium. Small local gangs often arise in poverty-stricken areas where survival is dependent on strength and ruthlessness. Swoop gangs exist on many worlds as outriders rebelling against authority. Some find sponsorship through larger criminal enterprises and serve as frontline soldiers for criminal empires. Big Giz was a typical example of a villainous swoop gangster. He maintained and rode his swoop constantly and sold the enforcement services of his gang for villains like Prince Caesar and Jabba the Hutt. Giz probably became the leader of his gang, using his considerable size and aggression to cow any dissenters. Many bounty hunters, gamblers, and force sensitives gravitate towards the use of these terrifying hoverbikes.
Better Black Sun than none, frequent saying in the lower levels during the sacking of Coruscant in 3653 BBY.
Black Sun was initially founded on Coruscant during a period of civil unrest in the Old Republic era. They kept their headquarters on Coruscant throughout their history, forming a dark counterpoint to the Republic. Black Sun operated in the same economic sector as the Hutt Khajidics and the Exchange: spice, slavery, extortion, and gambling. Their organizational structure consisted of 9 Vigos, each of which commanded illegal business enterprises in a defined region of the galaxy. In the years between 19 BBY and 4 ABY, Black Sun did a large amount of business with the Galactic Empire. One of the men behind the subterfuge that led to the creation of the Galactic Empire eventually became the leader of Black Sun. This was a violent and charismatic Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Maul. Prince Xizor is probably the best-known leading Vigo. He was a Falleen, a species of green-skinned, somewhat reptilian humanoids. Falleens used pheromones to attract mates, and this ability could affect other species, such as humans. Xizor used his pheromones as a tool for negotiation and manipulation of business rivals, as well as to influence those he could not bribe into doing his bidding. Black Sun also engaged in perfectly moral and legal commerce, such as that done by Xizor's transport services, in order to carry the appearance of legitimacy. Black Sun remained ascendant as a criminal enterprise until 3 ABY, when Prince Xizor was killed in space battle by Darth Vader.
Jabba was one of the most famous Hutts. He was a spiteful and dangerous business associate of Han Solo before the Battle of Yavin, and paid over 200,000 credits for the captain's capture. He died an inglorious death at the hands, or rather the chains, of Leia Organa. This earned the princess a sizable price on her head, placed by relatives of Jabba's. Hutt space is a region between the mid and outer rim, which contains a few hundred to a few thousand worlds, and is ruled by Hutts like Jabba. These individuals are exemplars of true scum, decadent, capricious, cruel, and full of avarice. Jabba forms a common stereotype of the Hutt as a paragon of greed and hedonism, and by inference, the rest of Hutt space, being ruled by Hutts, is a society where justice and morality are replaced by profit and exploitation. Many Hutts engaged in explicitly immoral activities, such as promptly executing subordinates for perceived incompetence or alleged dishonesty, slavery, extortion, rigging gambling systems, and generally conducting their business violently. Hutts employ untold numbers of smugglers, enforcers, bounty hunters, and ganger scum. They are well connected to the underworld throughout the galaxy and exert considerable influence over the economics and politics of the galaxy. The history of Hutt space reaches back to 25,000 ABY. There has been no effective rule of law in Hutt space other than that of the Hutt Khajidics. During all this time, though various governments have claimed authority over planets there. Even the extremely widespread and effective galactic empire could not impose its will on the profit-motivated and insatiable Hutts. Systems in Hutt space are part of Khajidics, which are the commercial enterprises of powerful Hutt leaders. Khajidics is also the honorific given to the leaders of Khajidics, as well as the name for the Hutt philosophy. The commerce these organizations engage in may or may not be of a moral and legal status. In hut space, the huts probably do as much or more legitimate commerce than illicit, considering how long a functioning society has been maintained there. Hut space has no official borders. Tatooine, for example, though firmly within the hut sphere of influence, was technically a republic world. Tatooine has been governed, if loosely, by various factions throughout the ages, like the Old Republic, the Infinite Empire, or the Kumamga. Hut influence on this world has waxed and waned over the millennia. Unstable and loose political affiliation with the galaxy at large is common in the Outer Rim territories, and among the worlds of Hut space. Given its ancient cultural continuity, Hut space forms one of the more stable galactic societies. This may be due to its heterogeneous and porous nature. When the faction's only goal is profit, there is greater latitude for diplomatic solutions when coming into conflicts with states, allowing for a somewhat peaceful solution. The fact that Hut space has no official borders also means that it can expand or reduce its sphere of influence with greater impunity than a traditional state. During the Galactic Civil War, the Hut Kaijidics remained neutral. An alliance with them was sought by the rebels, but thanks to Imperial espionage, this never happened. The Empire abhorred the lawlessness of the Hutts, but as their territory and business was crucial to the galactic economy, the Empire rarely attempted to impose its law on them without approval from high command. During other well-known conflicts, such as the Clone Wars, Hut space proved to be a region of high strategic value. Hut space has numerous stable hyperspace lanes, which can facilitate a timely deployment of military material throughout the galaxy.
The Hut Kaijidics and other criminal factions have for millennia bankrolled the smuggling trade throughout the galaxy. Smugglers, often branding themselves as freelance spacers, have for eons earned fortunes or death by transporting dangerous cargo between the stars. Most good smugglers travel in freighter-class starship. These spacers often have no political allegiance and are concerned primarily with quick paydays. Though they usually carry sidearms and their ships are well armed, they prefer to avoid conflict whenever possible. For them, combat is only extra work that they don't get paid for and could damage their goods. Dash Rendar was a prominent smuggler and sometimes contractor for Black Sun, as they ran extensive smuggling rings throughout the galaxy. He was a contemporary of the legendary spacer Han Solo. These men were the same age, came from Corellia, and had the same class of YT series Corellian freighter. In essence, both men were space truckers and were the archetypical smugglers. Their work could be legal, but as the prohibition of certain products drives the price up so high, they frequently engaged in illegal shipping. People in this line of work tend to be adrenaline junkies, individuals prone to taking absurd risks for equally absurd rewards. As such, they tend to enjoy the vices of liquor, spice, and gambling, and thus have limited lifespans. The Millennium Falcon was a famous Corellian freighter with a long history and an incredible amount of customization that changed ownership primarily based on the outcomes of card games. A similar freighter from another era, the Ebon Hawk, also had its formal ownership transferred by strange twists of fate rather than simple commercial exchanges. Fast ships are the common denominator among smugglers, being very useful for outrunning authority. As such, smugglers tend to be gearheads, constantly repairing and modifying their ships. The Loke Revenants and the Onaka Gang were some of the more well-known pirate groups who have stalked space throughout galactic history, and it is this threat that often necessitates civilian starship weapons and security. As is likely the case on any world with an ocean, as soon as a society starts shipping cargo by sea, unsavory people realize that there is wealth to be made by raiding ships. When the major hyperspace routes were charted, it was similar to less technologically advanced societies mastering the sea. Those without care for the sanctity of property and life haunt the vast darkness of spaceways and hyperspace, waiting like coiled serpents in the dark for a vermin to let its guard down. Pirates also take on mercenary work, and particularly numerous or powerful pirate gangs could even threaten whole worlds. The pirate lord Iako Stark, for example, started the Stark Hyperspace War.
Exiles include Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mitra Sirik, Naga Sadow, and Exar Kun. Exiles have been some of the most evil, yet also some of the most altruistic and benevolent characters in the galactic history. Often on the losing side of a conflict, run astray of a crime lord, or otherwise unwelcome in regular galactic civilization, exiles either find solace on a backwater planet or wander the galaxy as nomads. Many in exile is also under constant persecution from local or galactic governments, and must always be on the lookout for enterprising assassins or bounty hunters.
The Rebellion to Restore the Republic is one of the most prominent examples of rebel groups throughout the galactic history. Not all insurrectionists have positive intentions, however, as some are made up of political dissidents seeking to restore a corrupt regime or made of violent groups. The Imperial Remnant also became a rebel faction after the death of Emperor Palpatine, as the formerly legitimate government was outlawed and its leadership had become fractured warlords or local tyrants. Rebellions can be localized, as many minor factions exclusive to certain worlds, such as Onderon, Mandalore, or Jabim, just to name a few, are known for fractured governments or rebel groups.
Villains can also be the representatives of ostensibly morally neutral groups, assuming that profit motive is at worst morally neutral. Corporations themselves can be villainous and scummy, such as the Zerka Corp, when their pursuit of profit leads them to violence and cruelty. What is seldom part of recorded galactic history, as it doesn't make for a dramatic tale, are the billions of individuals who are employed and financially supported by a galaxy-spanning corporation like Zerka, the trillions of credits and taxes which they contributed to public works, or the technical innovations that they spearheaded. Yet this does not excuse their crimes. No amount of trickle-down economics can absolve Zerka of the wide-scale enslavement of entire species, of war profiteering, or any other inhumane business practices. Corporations are capable of, and often are, villains, but they are far from the worst. When a corporation wipes out a species, it isn't because of a personal animus towards that creature. It was simply in the way, and the amount of credits required to save the species is greater than the profit of destroying it. If the profit motive were on the saving of the species, an organization like Zerka would be all too willing to do so. In fact, Zerka Corp contributed greatly to restoring the biome of Telos 4 in 3955 BBY. Corporate entities often had ties to the underworld. The Trade Federation, banking clans, and other such economic institutions were known for their corrupting influence. They conducted military campaigns against civilians and hired assassins and bounty hunters to remove business rivals. Some corporations were a legitimate front for more criminal enterprises, such as the numerous legitimate operations of Black Sun.
I can get you more credits.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
Bounty hunters work in a gray area, morally speaking. Some are so ruthless and uncaring for their life or anybody else's that their contracts consist of assassinations and mercenary work. Many bounty hunters track wanted fugitives, acting as supplemental agents to law enforcement. The fugitives could be serial killers, war criminals, pickpockets, or Jedi Knights in hiding. Money is the primary concern of most bounty hunters. Bounty hunters can be some of the most dangerous individuals apart from Sith Lords in the galaxy. Their world is ruthless and cutthroat, and only the most violent and deranged survive. Thus, most have developed their own unique set of survival strategies. Combat proficiency is part of this, but more important than purely martial skills is forethought. Boba Fett, for example, was infamous for the wide array of traps he could set within Slave One, his huge weapons arsenal, and durable Mandalorian armor. Fett was known in his day as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. He often worked for Jabba the Hutt and collaborated with the Empire, placing him in the category of villainous scum. Fett was far from the only extremely dangerous individual in Jabba's employ. Bounty hunters form their own category of scum and villainy, although ostensibly moral organizations, like the Galactic Republic, have used the services of bounty hunters for their unique skills. The morality of a bounty was contextual to who was being hunted and why. Some hunters would operate under strict personal moral codes that would preclude them from taking on certain contracts, or exclusively help law enforcement or civil authorities. Other bounty hunters, such as the Trandoshan Bosch, saw themselves as no different from any animal in the jungle. They treated the sanctity of sentient life with the same respect that any sentient can give to its prey animal. Many governments do not prohibit bounty hunting, and it is legal within their borders, making at least some proportion of bounty hunter income legitimate. Bounty hunters may perform contract killings, bodyguarding, sabotage, espionage, act as military regulars, or hunt and capture fugitives or escaped slaves. Most hunters were members of the Bounty Hunters Guild, an ancient, loose association for the legitimization of the trade. There were benefits to joining the guild, however, it was not required. Successful bounty hunters like Cad Bane, Gorm the Dissolver, Dirge, and Aurra Singh, to name only a few, tend to have an impressive arsenal of equipment customized to satisfy their personal taste for violence. Each successful bounty hunter's equipment loadout is as unique as their personality, physiology, and life experience. Fledgling bounty hunters are easy to spot by their conspicuous lack of advanced equipment relative to their seasoned counterparts. As bounty hunter armor is essential, as young hunters like Greedo, cut down early in their career, can attest, if he were not dead. Though the people bounty hunters pursue can be very dangerous, the greatest threat to them is often other bounty hunters. They often kill each other in competition over high-priced bounties.
It is within the confines of galactic law that the most violent and cruel villains are found. The people motivated by sentiments as ephemeral and destructive as vengeance and justice become some of the worst villains of all. The Jedi Order, even in name, seems to align itself with law. Yet it was this order that produced the first Sith magicians, who stored a new, evil kind of power in a variety of artifacts. The power they put in items, such as Ulic Kel Drama's gauntlet, is what corrupted Force users from benevolent paragons of sanity and peace into the power-mad, violent Sith. The corrupting power would never have been created without the Jedi and its order placed on the Force. Laws change depending on who or what the legitimate government of the time is. The Republic, like the Empire, sought to produce a codified body of laws for the galaxy. Some legislate on consensus and others by force. Because of the vastness of these structures, aside from broad statutes, planets often find themselves governed by local sub-leaderships. Galaxy-wide legal institutions do exist, such as an intergalactic court and its various police branches, such as the Jedi, judicial forces, the reformed remnants of the Republic military, Senate Guard, New Republic Security Force, and Sector Rangers. The Empire would often use institutions such as the Inquisitorium, Imperial Security Bureau, and Imperial Office of Criminal Investigations as means of law enforcement. The Empire and various Sith incarnations would also rule through military assets, like Sith troopers and the Stormtrooper Corps, often instituting martial law and using soldiers as hired guns as enforcers, often serving as reminders of the absolute authority of their regimes. Bounty hunters can make a lucrative living from working with the various levels of law enforcement, hunting and even executing criminals. At the local level, planetary defense and local militias served as police forces, such as the Telos Defense Force, Royal Naboo Security Forces, Coruscant Security Force, and Taurus Civil Authority, just to name a few. Laws and customs may also be observed and enforced by these local authorities. Some more primitive worlds lacked any kind of local police, and many backwater and outer rim worlds were controlled so fully by criminal cartels that local strongmen would keep order and dictate how their realms would be governed. Violations of local laws also varied in punishment, from execution and slavery to prison sentences and fines.
All right, guys. So for this episode on Scum and Villainy, I think my favorite place to start here is to talk a little bit more about huts and some of the interesting things I found about huts while researching this. The first thing, as I said in the episode, hut space has been around and controlled by the Kaijidiks for 25,000 years, like continuously. And I think that kind of puts them in the realm of like the most stable galactic society that we see in history, except for maybe some of those like primordial civilizations like the Thoyor or something who are like around for like millions of years before recorded history.
Yeah.
But like in terms of the modern Star Wars, they seem to be the only people who figured out how to run a society. What do you guys think about that? Especially given the behavior that we see huts engaging in.
Yeah. You know, in a kind of dark way, I'm a big fan of the huts. I think
it's in a narco state.
They're good libertarians.
Yeah, they're good libertarians. Yeah, they kind of whoever is the most rich and wealthy is in charge. And
yeah, I think that generally sums up the hut philosophy of Kaijidik, which is really confusing because the leaders are called Kaijidiks. The philosophy is called Kaijidik, and the cartels are also called Kaijidik.
Yeah.
So it's
well, there is something though to even the fact that like in hut space, it's relatively much more peaceful than the rest of the galaxy.
Yeah, you never really hear about wars or anything going on in hut space. Like the Empire just kind of leaves them alone because they're too powerful and central.
And you also
to the
don't want
economy.
to, like, you can't buck the system because the hut gangs will put you down pretty quick, right? So.
Yeah, there's sort of like a cabal of huts that even if the huts are like having conflict with each other, they will band together if an outside force like tries to take over hut space, right?
Save that huts coming into conflict with each other because I have a great story about that I'll tell in a minute. But before that, as we were talking about before the show started, one of the reasons why huts are so powerful, I think, and why their society has lasted so long is because of their crazy long lifespans. Jabba the Hutt was like 600 when he died.
Yeah. And that's him being killed, right? Who knows how much longer he could have lived beyond that.
And if you know anything about like business and finances, you know that wealth generates wealth, right? And so you multiply that over 600, or who knows, maybe they live for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Lifespan, like you don't even have to do anything. You can be a pauper as a Hutt, and eventually you're going to be super rich.
Yeah.
Just by your 1% interest, right?
The gradual accumulation of wealth.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're also, of course, force resistant, which means that the Sith and the Jedi can't really get in there and screw with them like they can with most other species.
That's also an interesting observation because it could be like, think of that space as a place where the Force doesn't exist.
I was just
right?
thinking about that too. Maybe the Force like doesn't affect them in any way.
Right,
And
and
that's
so-
also how they can hold on to
and the
power.
whole-
Well, they definitely can't be influenced by the Force. Like,
the mind trick doesn't work.
the
on
mind
them.
trick.
Yeah, some species are more resistant than others, and
I
some
wonder
can
if
actually
like
obliterate the
force
altogether.
lightning would work, or a force choke
Well,
would
I'm-
work on a hut or something.
I'm sure like telekinetic powers could work on them.
or
but-
throwing something at them using.
throwing something.
Yeah, but like the.
But I mean, who knows how long it would even take
Like,
a
could battle
lightsaber to cut through them?
Could battle meditation work on a hut? Probably
I don't think
not.
so.
Yeah, I wouldn't
They'd
think
probably
so.
be resistant to it.
But that's the thing is like the story of Star Wars is this back and forth of the light and the dark side, and the huts are just sitting in the middle, like
Yeah, exactly. They're just that's the other thing I really love about huts, and especially Jabba. I just read his comic book run in Dark Horse. Is he's always having a great time, and all the huts are always having a great time. I mean, half of Jabba's dialogue, he's got that great laugh going on. He's just loving life.
that iconic.
Eating his frogs, like
Yeah, the other thing I love about hut space is just like I think like the huts bring in like a lot of character to the Star Wars universe as well.
They're terrific.
Yeah, but even hut space, it's like it's so it's like it's total anarchy. You're right. Like there's so many species. There's no like.
They're very cosmopolitan.
Yeah,
multicultural.
Yeah, it is like it is like sort of a huge melting pot.
They enslave everybody
equally. Yeah.
But if you have money though, they don't care about your class.
But there's so much like what's that one character that's like Jabba's like little right hand man?
Bib Fortuna.
Yeah,
Or are
Bib
you talking
Fortuna. The Twi'lek.
Yeah.
No,
or are you talking the little laughing, the Kowakian monkey lizard?
Yeah. The monkey lizard.
Yeah, but there's also the Twi'leks too. But there's like so many, like even on Jabba's barge, there's like so many.
Sai Snoodles.
Yeah, there's so many different species just on his barge alone, right? And they know how to leverage each species to like their strengths to help serve the Hutt empire.
It's a beautiful thing. It's the multicultural dream.
In the worst of ways.
It's hot space.
Yeah.
So his name is Salacious B. Crumb.
Yeah, Salacious B. Crumb.
That's such a great
I can't
name.
believe that name.
Salacious Crumb.
Yeah.
I feel like really bad for forgetting that name, but yeah.
Me too. Yeah, that's a big miss for us. Yeah. So I said I wanted to save about huts fighting each other. So an interesting thing is the huts were initially a warrior race, if you can believe that. I didn't get too much into this because I think now I want to do a full episode.
Oh yeah,
just
it's
on
coming
the huts,
eventually
because that would be a lot of fun. But so they were a warrior race, and something that has continued, though they don't fight quite as much as they used to. They do have ritual combat, and like if you're challenged to ritual combat as a hut, like you have to accept. You're sort of obliged to, and to that end, Jabba the Hutt and some other hut another hut, I can't remember who it was, challenged Jabba's aunt, who was like the head Kaijidik at that time, to a hut wrestling match, basically. So they fought it out, and
sumo.
Yeah.
Say sumos.
So Jabba's aunt and this other hut fought it out. He killed the aunt, but then Jabba's cousin then was an infant at the time and was, huts. They're kind of like kangaroos. They have a pouch where their infants live in, and the hut had escaped the little baby, the unnamed baby, and then so Jabba knew that the infant would inherit the Kaijidik. And so what did Jabba do? He squashed it to death with his tail, like over and over again. He literally turned it into like
goo,
into goo on the ground, and killed his own cousin, which is pretty terrifying.
As a baby, yeah.
Also, another interesting thing about huts is they're hermaphrodites, and they have plastic genders, meaning that they'll sometimes huts will identify as males or present as males at some time, and then when they decide they want to have a baby, then they'll present as females. And so that's a very interesting thing that you don't really get from a cursory examination of Star Wars, that Jabba the Hutt, especially in what we see of him in the movies is very male, and I can't imagine him being a loving mother. But apparently that would happen.
He does have a son, though.
Yeah, he does. So.
Well, yeah, it is. I kind of like that angle just because it's like they are like a very different species.
And now that I think about it, actually,
slugs are hermaphroditic.
Yeah.
That's totally
and the way they mate
Totally,
is actually it's penis fencing.
The winner.
And there's a great episode of Planet Earth that gets into that. If you want to see, it's pretty epic.
We'll put that in the show notes. Okay?
Kind of going back to the whole anarcho state of Hutt space too. Obviously opens up the Star Wars universe.
It's anarcho and narco.
Both the best worlds. But it opens up that kind of Western feel, right? It allows you to work in a world where like the Wild West is, everyone's out for themselves, even though that might be a more romantic interpretation of the real Wild West. I won't get into it, but the George Lucas version of the Wild West, right? So it allows for, you're shooting from the hip space smugglers. Everyone's armed, everyone's dangerous, kind of. Everyone's in it for their own gain environment. And I love that aspect of Star Wars because you have like very strong figures like the Empire as this like big totalitarian regime. You have like the freedom fighting rebels, and then you have this third faction that's kind of a loose cannon. It could go either way. You have characters like Han that side with the rebels or Dash Rendar. Then you have other characters like Boba Fett or IG-88 that are painted as big villains, right? And for the most part, their jobs are very morally ambiguous.
Although even both those examples, I believe, at some point in the Star Wars oeuvre, they do what you would in professional wrestling parlance call a face turn. They become good guys.
Sure, yes. But there are, characters known to be, quote unquote, the bad guys, even though they're morally ambiguous.
Yeah.
So let's hop off of Hutts for a second and just think about, like, sort of what we were talking about this is that there's like scum and then there's villains. Villains are oftentimes scum, but scum aren't necessarily villains. In fact, a lot of scum aren't villains and are good guys. Like the rebels, for example, would kind of fall into that scum category. Han Solo certainly would count as scum, but he's obviously a very good guy.
Scum by trade.
Yeah, he's scum by trade. But so what are like some other notable examples, I guess, of scum in the Star Wars universe that are good guys, though?
Dash Rendar is like the copy
Dash Rendar. He's the go-to.
Yeah.
What was the like smuggler character in KOTOR 2? I can't remember his name.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to look that.
But
up.
I don't remember.
I remember his face, and I remember he kind of dressed like Han Solo.
Yeah, and he definitely was mimicking.
There's always a Han Solo.
Yeah,
character.
he's sort of like
the archetype,
the scoundrel.
Yeah, the scoundrel, basically.
The lovable scoundrel.
Yeah.
Atin Rand.
Oh
yeah.
It's like Ayn Rand. Jordan.
That's true. That's probably where he got his name from.
I never even thought
about that. Yeah,
interesting.
There's a lot of like kind of cool characters, and I also like that sort of the Hutt space or the scum and villainy. It does bring in like a lot more moral ambiguity and questions about like even class and what happens when you get sucked into an underworld, and what are the like socioeconomic forces that draw you into the hive of scum and villainy, right? For you to become like no one just wakes up and decides they want to be like a bounty hunter, probably.
Well, or a spice junkie or something.
Yeah. It adds a like a dirty underlayer to, the high polish of Star Wars. At least I'm thinking in the prequel era. You have the high society like Coruscant, and then as you go darker and deeper into the city, it becomes seedy and questionable. And
but like you have to do like, in order to make it big, you have to like take on a lot bigger risks when you're in that world. Even in like Phantom Menace, for instance, Anakin has to be like a pod racer to get out of poverty, right?
Right,
like
it could kill him very easily.
It's like really dangerous.
It's basically like being a child soldier, or something,
or a slave, maybe, or a child slave almost.
I guess.
I think there's some real comparisons there.
But there are those kind of like dynamics in that sort of underworld, and which is just like kind of interesting to think about.
And I think something I also realized, especially with the other big crime organizations like Black Sun and stuff, is they're also incredibly long-lived, and like compared to the Republic or the Empire, who like wax and wane in their power. Like Black Sun, for example, was around for 4,000 years. I think the Exchange was sort of around
for a long time as well. Yeah,
and these organizations were as powerful as any state. Like they had tens of thousands of soldiers and top of the line equipment and everything.
Yeah.
And in a way, I wonder if there's sort of more drama, and maybe even the galaxy sort of turns according to the Scum section more so than these big states and like the rebels fighting the Empire. It's like the important stuff that's going on in galactic history is really going on in the
behind the scenes
in the underworld and stuff.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that assessment. I don't think it's more important, but definitely there are connections, and there would be connections even on the political level of like senators being corrupted by the underworld, right? Why did they vote this way or that way? That's, any criminal organization putting their fingers into the political pool, right? So they still definitely would have influence over it. And even cases of like Darth Vader having to negotiate with the crime prince, like Zizor. I say it so many different ways.
Yeah, Exizor. I liked that one.
But yeah, exactly right. The fact that you're negotiating with someone, like Darth Vader doesn't negotiate with people, right? The Empire doesn't negotiate with people.
Yeah.
But even when it comes to the criminal underworld, they have to kind of
because there's just so
you have
powerful.
to have a really strong bargaining position.
Right, exactly. So they have to strike some kind of status quo in order to keep the galaxy smooth.
Yeah, but it's also beneficial, like Hut Space is beneficial to all parties to sort of have a neutral ground where you can go, like, even just take a vacation from it all, or go and
I wouldn't go to vacation in Hut Space, but
maybe not vacation, but like I don't know, like if you need even if you need to like meet other dignitaries,
right? It's a neutral territory.
Yeah, it's like a more neutral territory where you can sort of do things and sort of be relatively safe, because the Huts do not want any sort of conflict.
They don't want to bring
happening.
heat on themselves. Yeah.
Not
to go back to Hut Space, but an interesting fact about it. It is actually a very important hyperlane corridor. So it actually has a strategic value too.
Yeah, what was it? Was it the Utmian or the Prelemian or something?
I never remember the exact names, but it has a couple of hyperlanes that are super important, and it becomes a battleground of sorts, even in the Clone Wars, where they're kind of trying to vie for Hut's cooperation. Right? Because again, they're so powerful, they don't need a third enemy, a third faction. So the Confederates and the Republic are forced into this negotiating table again, right? Showing how much influence they have. They're almost a state, a crime state, right?
I do wonder too, we kind of touched on it before, but like how much, like there doesn't seem to be a lot of the Force happening within Hut Space. It seems to be like almost like a dead zone for the Force. Maybe not a total dead zone, but there, like, I don't know if there probably is some.
It might be kind of like how the mid rim is just kind of like boring,
ignored.
And for some reason they just
skip
none
over
of the writers
it.
like to write about it.
But like other than like Anakin on Tatooine and Luke on Tatooine, I suppose
Tatooine wasn't really in Hut Space.
I guess
it was in the outer rim,
but it is like,
but it was controlled by a Hut.
It's like an underworld, right? Like there isn't a lot of. It doesn't seem like a lot of like powerful Force users come from these places, Hut Space or underworld.
That's not entirely true. There's a couple of significant, so it actually has a lot of ties to the dark side. There are a number of Sith Lords that do actually emerge from the underworld.
Was Korriban outer rim?
I believe it's an outer rim world, but I'm just off the top of my head. But like that aside, just individuals like Darth Bane came from this backwater mining planet.
Wasn't Revan from?
I don't know.
I don't know about a.
No, I feel
underworld.
like Revan was more from mainstream.
Oh, okay.
Like he definitely was inducted into the Jedi Temple, so he was probably picked up as a child.
Right.
That's just off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that. But anyways, the Sith, right? Anakin was born on a backwater world.
Yeah.
A lot of these characters do come from that seedy underworld, and I think it has more in line with the dark side just naturally, because it's not a place that cultivates caring, sharing, or anything like that, right? It's a place where you have to fight and kill to survive.
It doesn't seem like the Jedi Order is out there looking for recruits.
No, exactly, and that's my point. They don't generally want to recruit from a place where you've you've come from a place of self-reliance and selfishness. That's not the Jedi way.
Or even like trauma and stuff.
Right, exactly.
That,
like you're starting off on the back foot if you're born
yeah.
on one of those planets controlled by crime lords,
Yeah.
forced into a life of poverty and slavery and things like that.
There is also an interesting side note here about the dark side. Is the dark side, at least in the Tales of the Jedi comics, where they get into like some of the first Sith and stuff, the first Sith exiles and Sith lords, it seems as though the dark side was a creation, which is a weird way to look at it. But it's not like the Force had a dark and a light aspect. It just had the light aspect. But then there are these Jedi.
It's like a corruption of.
There are these Jedi who are practicing alchemy and like infusing these objects with power, and then in that process of their alchemy, then that's sort of where the dark side was born. For some reason, once the Force like got infused into these artifacts, then it became like evil, and then the Sith exiles went out to like the Outer Rim and stuff, and maybe that's sort of why the dark side pops up in these places. Christian's looking at me like he wants to strangle me.
No. I don't know what the sources are on that. There's definitely.
I told you, Tales of the Jedi.
Right. I'm trying to avoid getting into.
Christian never knows what the sources are when
I just know
when it's a fact that he doesn't agree with personally. Then
I can't vouch for its existence.
He can't vouch for the sources.
No. I mean, Tales of the Jedi takes place a long time after even
Dawn of the
Jedi, and I'm just thinking about Tython and the whole balance and things. But then that's open to interpretation of. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just questioning in my own mind.
Well, there could be even conflicting stories that, like
true.
within the
origin
EU,
stories,
that is like kind of doesn't.
Because Tales was written in like '94 or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is a
And
long
Dawn
time
of the
before
Jedi
Dawn
came.
of the Jedi.
That was like 15 years out.
Yeah, and some of it can be open to like internal interpretation. It could be open. I'm just trying to work it through my own mind.
All right, guys. So my favorite Scum character that I found out in this research is Gorm the Dissolver, who I mentioned a couple times. What I like about Gorm the Dissolver is he's an android of some kind, but nobody really knows where he's from because he's just like a patchwork of a whole bunch of different robot and even biological parts.
Okay.
And there's an interesting thing. This is kind of like our earlier association with Ayn Rand and Ayn Rand, is I think the name Gorm the Dissolver is a nod to another famous Star franchise. It's like Star Path or Star Road. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Something about
Star
maybe a
Tracks? Something
track,
like that.
Star Trek?
Yeah, I think it's Star Trek. So in Star Trek, there's a very famous...
Never heard of it.
Never heard of Star Trek?
Nope.
Well, this will be news to you. It's probably one of the most recognizable scenes where Captain Kirk fights a lizard.
Oh, yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
There's that great theme music. That guy's name was Gorn.
Oh,
Or
okay.
the species, and he was a reptilian,
Right.
And I believe he even had 3 claws for fingers.
Okay.
And Gorm the Dissolver has one arm that's a reptile arm with 3 claws.
Okay.
And so I think it's a subtle nod, and he's called
It's sort of like an Easter egg.
yeah, exactly. And he's called the Dissolver because he has this attachment on his arm that kind of works like what's the name of the car in Back to the Future?
Oh, the DeLorean.
The DeLorean.
Yeah.
You know how it runs on garbage?
Right.
Gorm the Dissolver can do that to biomatter to power himself. So he has like essentially a blender or a garbage disposal, and he'll kill his target because he's like a bounty hunter and like dissolve their parts. And
I just want to say it's hard to collect a bounty on some. Like, how do you confirm a kill when you turn them into goo?
You could just take parts of them and like.
I guess.
Bring the ear or something.
Yeah.
To Jabba the Hutt.
Make a necklace of ears.
Which Gorm would do because he was well known to be quite unhinged and would like laugh maniacally at inappropriate times and stuff. And what I also like about him is nobody really knows what became of him. He just kind of disappeared at some point. But people think he might still be around because there's a possibility that maybe there are no original parts of whatever Gorm was when he was first created. and so that he just looks like something different, or he's just like one computer processing chip left in the back of some cargo ship or something. So anyway, what are your guys' favorite Scum characters?
Do you want to go, Jordan?
Greedo.
And Greedo, I learned something fun about too. That was only his like second mission as a bounty hunter.
Oh, really?
And this is sort
Poor
of
Greedo.
I just love that his name is Greedo. Like, it's so on the nose.
it's a pretty great name.
It's just like, and Greedo shot first, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I love like those sort of little quirky characters who also have like
Huge
in the
backstories.
EU there's like just volumes written about them, which is hilarious because they have like one scene in a movie.
Yeah. I even say, like, you freeze frame any scene in a Star Wars movie, every background character will have a history and a backstory and a name.
There's probably a backstory for the holographic Rancor on that like chess game that Chewie
There is,
plays.
yes.
Yeah. What about you, Christian?
I'm going to go with the fan favorite. Everybody loves him. Everybody knows him. Boba Fett.
Yeah, hard to go wrong with Boba Fett.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm just a huge Mandalorian fanboy.
Episode on Boba forthcoming
Yeah,
for sure.
and all of Mandalorians. Even
Every
though
Mandalorian character.
yes, one by one. Unfortunately, though, Boba has lost his title of Mandalorian, but his mystique still sticks around. He's still the original gunslinger, mystery man.
That's only in canon, though,
Fistful of dollars. It was the inspiration for Boba Fett. No, it's in the... George Lucas made that proclamation before Disney bought it, unfortunately. So
Really?
Yes. I have serious problems with it. We'll discuss it further on.
George Lucas, I'm also noticing as I comb through Wikipedia articles, makes a lot of weird stands about like specific story decisions.
Yeah.
Like
I think it's something that like he just doesn't like that the whole universe has so gotten away from him.
He's trying to assert control.
Yeah, it's more like a power thing. It's like, no, I'm in control of this. I made it.
There's like this weird story about there's a hut in the Clone Wars cartoon series.
Zeo the Hutt.
Zeo the Hutt. And he sounds like Truman Capote, right? He's got like that high pitched, and he also speaks Basic, which he's like I think one of the only Hutts who ever speaks Basic. And that was one of those weird executive decisions by George Lucas. He actually told them to make him sound like Truman Capote.
He had a very specific vision.
It's like, why? It was kind of a good decision, but it's like such a weird detail for him to
obsess
impose
over
on the writers.
Yeah. But going back to Boba Fett, just bounty hunters in general, I love them as these rogues that could be like either or gray area mercenary types.
I was thinking a good episode to do would be just do the rogues gallery of bounty hunters, you know, on when Darth Vader's on the Executor Bridge in Empire Strikes Back, and there's all those bounty hunters lined up.
Yeah.
I want to do an episode where we just go through every of those awesome bounty hunters. Dengar, also one of my favorites. He's
another one with volumes of back.
Yeah, he's got some pretty fun stuff going on.
Yeah. And Bosch too. Bosch has a long history.
Bosch is pretty awesome. All right, viewers. So I'm going to solicit some emails from you. You can reach us at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Tell us who your favorite denizen of the underworld, what scummy or villainous character is your favorite and why. You can also reach out to us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, I believe.
Yeah, send us a DM, Starlords Podcast. Yeah, send us a DM. Let us know what you think.
And may the force be with you.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
I got a bad feeling about
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to give the show a 5-star rating and review, and give us a follow on social media. This episode was produced and edited by me, Jordan Swaim, written and directed by Christian Lutz and Sam Swaim. All original music was scored and recorded by my music project, Farewell to Shadowland.